Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War, Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. This time around we are on the Forest of Norden, playing as the forces of the Empire against the peasant hordes of Brettonia. And this is honestly one of my favorite matchups in the game because it's such a close match where you've got so much variety of builds, so many opportunities, so many choices, so many things you can do. And that's not something you get with many matchups in this game. Oftentimes there's much more narrow selection of viable units, and that's why one of the reasons I really like the Empire vs Brettonia matchups. The factions are balanced well enough that you will see almost the full breadth of different units that the factions can field, and it's pretty awesome. So this time around I decided to do something different. I've been running more heavy Balthazar heavy builds lately. Before I was on a bit of Balthazar, on a bit of a kick with sometimes Volkmar, and so I wanted to go back to good old Karl Franz. And I think there's, besides Boris or maybe the Empire General, I think the other Empire Lords are all pretty competitive and viable in this matchup. And so let's kind of break this down, because I went with a very wide infantry build, not a lot of shooting, and some good old cavalry goonage over there. So for my lord, I decided to bring good old Karl. He is, of course, a very potent, able to lay the law down on just about anybody with a very high burst damage. He's got 470 weapon strength, the Reichland Runefang, Golem Raz, high melee attack, good melee defense, or respectable melee defense at least, with hold the line active, foe seeker, stand your ground, monsters 90 charge bonus, 100 armor. He just hits like a truck, and 70 mobility is respectable. It's not amazing, but it's definitely respectable for a horse. Alongside him, we do have a Jade Wizard, who does have regrowth, flesh to stone, as well as Earthblood, and Life Bloom, and Power Stone. So a whole selection of different heals. Honestly, given that my intent here to blob, the rest of the regrowth was unnecessary, but hey, still worth the effort. The Warrior Priest over here is providing a huge selection of buffs as well. He does have a Hammer of Sigmar, he does have the Soulfire, Shield of Faith, and Benediction. You might think Benediction is a bit silly, who needs so much leadership? These guys are up to 105 and 87 here. But the fact is, plus 8 leadership, it can make a difference if your opponent's trying to terror bomb you or something like that. Having that extra leadership can be huge. Then we do have a Scroll of Power, so potentially we can rewind and use our Hammer of Sigmar, our Soulfire, and our Shield of Faith twice. We then also have a Royal of Griffiths, as well as normal Dagger Knights with halberds over here, so a smaller cavalry contingent than what I usually bring. But nonetheless, with this big old blob of troops, we should potentially be able to sort of knock out segments of my opponent's army, take it apart one at a time. For our front line, it is a mix of swordsmen, Sigmar's sons, and then 2 great swords here in the center. Great swords trade incredibly well with Brettonian peasants. Honestly, so do swordsmen. They do really well against most of the Brettonian troops. A bunch of spearmen on the periphery, and then a single unit of Chevron mortars here in the center, who are immediately going to start teeing off on the Brettonian mob. Now, for my opponent, he went much wider than I did, and he's gone with a very infantry heavy build. But interestingly enough, he went very melee heavy, I went pretty melee heavy, so neither of us really have the shooting. I did bring the mortars to sort of pressure archers and prevent my opponent from doing any dirty business like that, but nonetheless, my opponent here, he does have a mix of some men-at-arms in the front, peasants in the very front, men-at-arms in the second row, and then foot squires in the back, so a pretty hefty, powerful infantry force that can definitely overwhelm my smaller infantry groups. That said, they're going to take a while to chew through the spearmen. They're definitely going to struggle against the great swords and Sigmar's sons, so I do have an advantage there. Men-at-arms with polearms, also a pretty potent threat that could support these Knights Errant and the defenders of the Fleur de Lis against the Altar of Griffiths over there. I can't even talk. We do also have a Damsel of Life who does have Earthblood, a regrowth, Life Bloom, Aura of the Lady, as well as Power Stone. Obviously, for the Brettonians, they're not going to get that much benefit from Flesh to Stone. You might be wondering why I brought it. Well, the fact of the matter is Brettonians have a lot of non-AP units. Besides Questing Knights and Royal of Griffiths, there isn't much Brettonians tend to bring against cavalry that's APs. The polearms are actually kind of a bit of a surprise here. So being able to get an extra 60 armor can definitely be nifty if you're fighting, say, Grail Knights. It's very, very useful. Otherwise, my opponent does have King Louis up in the sky, who does have his full kit besides the Lion's Shield, in fact, which is a big missile resist buff, though ironically it works out here. I do think it's generally worth bringing, though here where I brought almost no missile pressure, it's going to work out nicely. That said, as my opponent starts pressuring me here with his air cav, I'm going to pull my cavalry force out of the woodwork. Probably shouldn't have committed all of them, probably should have just brought a small pocket of them as a threat, but and to hide, kept the unit hidden, but we are now in a position to sort of threaten my opponent there a little bit. Anytime the mortars here teeing off on the men-at-arms, I'm kind of just spreading out their damage output, trying to soften up multiple units at once, make it harder for my opponent to land effective heals or anything of that sort, and also just trying to soften up more critical units. I want the armor-piercing anti-large infantry off the field more than I really care about the foot squires, who are kind of against demigriffs. Unfortunately here, I don't know why I ping the peasant mob. I think it was a misclick and a bit of a rush, but unfortunately we do waste a few shots there. That said, you can see the formation here collapsing, the disciplined troops of the Empire falling back to protect the flanks rather than committing in sort of willy-nilly manner. My opponent here kind of getting trapped a little bit. He pushes in with his peasant mob. We're going to interdict with our swordsmen. We're going to then be able to pivot around and bring our greatswords back into the fray and potentially start dumpstering these guys pretty effectively. That said, taking an overarching look, we can see that my opponent has this big pocket of flyers just sitting out. He doesn't want to dive in because he knows I've got this goon squad ready to go, and so he's being very patient, and I'm being patient. And so in the meantime, this front line fight here is just going at it. It does remind me of one of the short stories from the Emperor's armies, where the Brettonian cavalry and the Empire cavalry just got sitting and letting the infantry grind it out. Well, that's kind of what's happening here. But finally, my opponent is going to commit a little bit here with the Knights Errant. So I'm going to countercharge with the Demigryph Knights. You can see, unfortunately, a mortar shot there hurting my own spearmen. But we're going to commit a new Demigryphs there. And as my opponent does dive in with the Royal Gryphites, or the Royal Hippogriffs, and the King Lewin, we're actually going to pivot all of our Demigryphs and charge in with all of our cavalry. And my opponent is going to be pretty quick on his feet. He's going to try to pull out. He has Pop stand your ground, trying to keep the Royal Hippogriff Knights here intact. But unfortunately, Karl Franz is in the fight. He is ticked off. He wants none of this. You can see a massive wave of buffs going down. And that's going to also improve all these greatswords and all these units in the pocket here. Just going to be dumpstering these troops. Unfortunately for the Hippogriff Knights, they're not able to squeak out with all their models. We actually take 2 models down before my opponent gets regrowth off. And the regrowth does almost nothing. And so this is something, whenever you guys cast spells, always be wary of what effect that spell is going to have. Right now, my opponent basically took no damage on 2 of these Royal Hippogriff Knights, or on the 4 up here, and he literally just lost 2 models. So the regrowth here is going to do nothing, and it's essentially wasted. So that's something that, just a little tip there that you want to watch out for. That said, my opponent definitely got these guys out pretty well. His Knights Errant have taken almost no damage. These guys took a few model losses, and he has started buckling my back line. He's also dove in on my mortar, and although we are going to be able to start pressuring King Louis here with our Demigryphs a little bit, Louis, of course, does have the benefit of just being pretty quick on his feet, or on a Beacus here, and so he's just going to kind of waddle away and not give a darn. That said, another bombardment does go down. We did pop our Scroll of Power, so we got that rewound second round of abilities. We're taking advantage of it to just mulch through these foot squires, mulch through this front line, and really pressure my opponent as another Earthblood does go down for my opponent, trying to keep his troops in the fight. So both of us, of course, with Lore of Life, just slugging it out here in the front line. Just a bit of a drawn-out slaughterhouse. My opponent here does pincer my greatswords, which is definitely some brutal stuff. But we are going to counteract that with a cast of Flesh to Stone, which is going to give these guys 155 armor, make them much tankier against the Knights Errant. We followed up with an Earthblood immediately. So although the unit of swordsmen there is going to buckle, the other units are holding okay. In the meantime, Karl here is going to dive in on the men-at-arms with polearms. And we're going to be able to buckle them, because while this might seem suicidal, throwing Demigryph Knights and Karl in there, it does mean we are going to be able to pressure these guys. They're, of course, Brettonians. Their leadership is trash, even with King Louis over there. And we're able to then pincer them with the Demigryph Knights, with the Royal Gryphites, and buckle this pocket of men-at-arms with polearms, and then stave off the collapse in this pocket, which is really useful. But my opponent, very quick on his feet, once again, diving in, got a little cheeky with his Hippogriff Knights, did some damage, got out quick. And so my opponent playing very well here, managing to reduce the impact my heavy anti-large contingent would have against his flyers. That said, if we do look at the fight here, you can see my opponent, he does manage to sort of bypass me there. He does dive in on this pocket of infantry, going after my poor greatswords. But over here, in the meantime, we are slaughtering these foot squires in the pits. These guys are going to get terror-routed. Over here, these guys definitely struggling. The greatswords holding their own up to almost 90 kills just now. Just chopping their way through. The spearmen plugging the gap, courageously fighting for Sigmar. Over here, these spearmen holding the line while the mortars just rain hell down on this pocket of trash. Well, I guess there's foot squires in there, so it's not that trashy, but on the men-at-arms and the trash troops, and doing some good work. They're definitely doing some decent damage. In the meantime, over here, we're just collapsing these pockets one after another, and slowly but surely eradicating the presence of these elite units. And as our Hippogriffs did manage to remove some men-at-arms with polearms over there, we are then able to pull them back. We're able to recover our forces and start regrouping. And my opponent, although he is breaking this pocket with the Sigmar Sons and the Greatswords, he hasn't really been able to force any routes that would then snowball into major losses. So that's definitely been beneficial for me. Over here, you can see Karl Franz here still slowing out. We did catch the Knights Errant out. We did catch the Defenders of the Fleur de Lis out. And once again, Soulfire, Hammer of Sigmar, Shield of Faith going down. This is one of the problems with this game for my opponent. Not so much, actually not bad for me, but my opponent playing very carefully, very efficiently, maneuvering back and forth. but this does mean that I have time to get my cooldowns back. I've been very sort of conservative with my usage of my buffs and debuffs, well, actually mostly buffs, I guess, on my troops. And because of that, my opponent has not really had the opportunity to dive in when all of my buffs are expired. I'm making sure not to waste all of Karl Franz's buffs at once, to waste all the Warrior Priest buffs, any of that stuff, and we actually force a mass rout of the Brettonian troops here. Of course, with this many foot squires and this many more elite infantry by Brettonian standards, it does impact the morale of the defenders of the Fleur-de-Lis and the Knights Errant and forces them to rout. So suddenly, although my opponent is able to sort of slaughter this pocket over here, basically these great swords are gone, these swordsmen really messed up, these spearmen are completely messed up, the mortar is going to be forced to flee. We have removed his cavalry from the field, his light cav, which potentially could be a nasty nuisance in the long run, and now we're chasing down the foot squires, farming the damage, and really doing a lot of work. My opponent is forced to take Lewin over here, trying to potentially looking to help his men-at-arms with shields here who are fighting against the great swords as well as the spears. But seeing that's coming, I do pull around my cav, looking to prevent my opponent from diving in. That said, this does give him the opportunity to regroup. You can see his defenders of the Fleur-de-Lis and then my men-at-arms and foot squires and all those troops rallying out there in the distance because I'm forced to sort of fall back, regroup here, trying to cover this infantry because I do want to keep them intact or in one piece. And we are pushing in to help the last two Sigmar sons, the last courageous heroes of the Empire here, fighting in the pits, soaked in blood, and the last one there does go down. Or actually, no, the last one's over there. He's on 1 HP. There he goes, and he gets chopped down by a horde of filthy peasants. But as my opponent did that, we do dive in. We do force a fight. We're going to charge in our great swords. We pop stand your ground. You can see the Reikland Runefang going down, buffing our troops. It's important to be conservative once again with your abilities. And you can see because I didn't use the Reikland Runefang in the earlier fight here against the cavalry, because I was conservative with it there, it's now available here, and I'm now able to take advantage of all these buffs from Karl to really nuke this formation. And that was a huge benefit for me. You can see the great swords here doing some great work, just chopping their way through this filth. Lewin, once again, forced to reconsider his life decisions, and the Royal Hippogriffs trying their best, but Karl's actually really good at sniping the models. He's able to really clock them over the head and make them lose models quickly. So they're losing one there. He just keels over in the dust. Another Royal Hippogriff there trying to hold, but he's not going to be able to hold up. His buddies up in the sky, but once again, similar situation to what happened earlier. The models get caught on the ground, and they die. So my opponent, down to 2 models here, is going to be forced to rout. And now things are looking grim for the Brettonians. Finally, we managed to force a breach. I do still have some troops out on the periphery who I'm now recovering and pulling back in. And we've got a death ball here of Empire. Our mortar crew back online. 52 kills now. They're going to have plenty of targets. Karl is in here. We are dropping nukes. We've got Soulfire going down. You can see those buffs once again recovering and coming back in. Karl is in here. The Jade Wizard is in here. If Lewin tries to do any funny business, Karl can hit him over the head real hard and make him feel very sad. And so Lewin being forced back here. And although these Knights Errant are definitely courageous, they're definitely trying their best. Simple fact of the matter is, guys, they're not doing anything against Royal Thorkir fights. Royal Thorkir fights are head and shoulders better, and they're just going to annihilate this cheap trash cav. And with that, my opponent's army is going to start buckling. You can see over here the Demigraph Knights with halberds and the Karl Franz just dumpstering Lewin. Sort of Corone, certainly debuffing melee defense, but it just doesn't matter. Earthblood goes down. Now the Warrior Priest is in there, and my opponent's army is finally giving way. The leadership just not holding up. At this point, it's only the Damsel of Life over here, and a few Hippogriffs out on the periphery, but too little too late. King Louis is going to buckle finally, and in a bit of an epic fight here, he's just surrounded on all sides by a lot of angry griffs, and it just gets torn apart and forced to rout. So very protracted, back and forth, fairly high micro despite the lack of shooting and really that many maneuvering elements game. There was a lot, I think, going on there that I hope gave some idea on what you want to be doing for both sides, because I think there's a lot my opponent did right, and I don't want to be tooting my own horn here, but I think there was a good chunk of things I did right as well, and I think this was actually one of the better games I've had in a long time. So really great job to Pinky here. I had a lot of fun and interesting build actually. It wasn't necessarily what I expected. What I'm used to seeing from Brettonians, but honestly not a bad build. So quickly going over the builds, I really enjoyed this build. I had fun with it. Like I said, I think it's awesome with this matchup how many builds are viable, how many combos are viable, what all the different things you can do. Basically, both factions can use like 90% of their roster in this matchup with fairly low risk, or well, I don't want to say low risk, but with the fact that it's viable. If you know what you're doing, if you have a clear idea of what you want to do with your build, you can make it work. And I think that's awesome. I think that it's not like the Vampire Council of Chaos where literally everything revolves around the Mortis engine. And the meta is almost identical like every single time. With this, there's just so much you can do, and I hope this build kind of showcased that, and for my opponent's build, I think definitely showcased that. But going over it, definitely the buffs were huge. The Warrior Priest and Karl Franz kind of bouncing off each other, providing a constant stream of plus 26 melee attack. Just crazy stuff, because I think Karl's Reikland Runefang is plus 26 for like 40 seconds. The Warrior Priest with the Scroll of Power had 50 seconds of plus 26 melee attack. And rather than dumping it all on there, unfortunately, there I had a bit of a wire tangling up. But rather than dumping it all on at once, we were able to make use of it over time. And it really helped in that protracted fight, having that constant stream of plus 26 buffs, the 22% damage resistance, the melee defense buffs from Karl Franz. That constant stream of improvements was really beneficial. The front line, the infantry here did their job. Honestly, I don't want to tout the kill counts here too much for either infantry pocket, because there was a lot of trash on the field. There was a lot of spearmen, there was a lot of swordsmen. For my opponent, there was a horde of peasants and men-at-arms, and even foot squads just aren't that. So the kill counts are obviously going to be inflated quite a good bit by the slaughter of these cheap trash troops, but on both sides. But still, the units did perform rather well. The Great Swords, of course, did a great job. Demigryphs gaining 3 chevrons in the course of this game, which is nuts. And 170 kills on the Royal Gryph Fights, 138 on the Demigryph Knights. Just a really great combo with this Cavalry Lord Goon Squad. We had that Warrior Priest, we had Karl, we had the double Gryphites, Lore of Life. They lost almost no models over the course of the game. Just amazing work. Really shut down those Royal Hippos and actually butchered the Knights Errant and the defense literally pretty well. And the Mortar Crew finally kind of forcing my opponent's hand, and that was really good. It kind of forced him to commit in a few places where I don't think he wanted to, and that was nice. Now for my opponent's build, I do think it's not bad. I think it's pretty cool to see this much infantry used, and the relative confidence in just Royal Hippogriff Knights and Night King Lewin, which is not bad. They're both very solid AP units that can definitely butcher lower amounts of Empire Cav. Now that said, I do think you might. I don't mind it. I do think you might want to bring an extra decent anti-large unit in there. I would consider, say, a second unit of Hippogriff Knights, or maybe a unit or 2 of Questing Knights. You could make a few cuts somewhere in here. You could like drop men-at-arms with pole arms, and I don't know. You can make some cuts somewhere. You could downgrade your defenders to like Knights Errant. You could at least drop the 2 men-at-arms with pole arms, honestly, and get a Knights Questing Knight right there. That would actually be an instant decent improvement, I think. Much more flexible and much more useful, I think, than 2 units of men-at-arms pole arms, especially when he had no backline to protect. But regardless, a pretty cool build. I do think that the attrition game, one of the benefits was that we both had Lore of Life, so we both wanted to be playing a bit more of an attritious and a bit more of a cautious game. But ultimately, I think the fact that I was just able to cycle through those buffs with Karl and the Warrior Priest, as well as the fact that I have much better leadership support. My opponent only really had Encourage on Lewin, whereas I had Encourage, I had Benediction, I had Hold the Line, I had the constant stream of either Stand Your Ground or Reikland Runefang providing buffs. It actually does add up. On top of the fact that Empire Infantry State Troops do have better leadership baseline, stack on top of that like +8, +4, plus even more potentially leadership depending on what buffs are going off. And you've got it's really difficult to break that Imperial Infantry, whereas the Brettonian troops just couldn't hold that well, and it forced some mass terror routes in a few situations, which really helped me. But regardless, well played to Pinky here. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you had fun. I know it was a bit of a long one, but I thought it was cool. I thought it was one of the best games I've had in a while, and I really had a lot of fun this one. So like I said, I do hope you guys enjoyed. I do hope all of you guys have a great new year, and don't get too drunk. Don't do anything too crazy. But I definitely hope you guys have a great new year, and I'll see you all in the next one. So I do thank you all for watching. Leave your comments and critiques down below, and I'll see you all in the next one in the new year, I suppose. Bye for now.